Vincent, thanks so much for joining us, man.
Yeah, thank you, man.
Yeah, no problem. Pleasure to be here.
Yeah, so we were just talking to you a little bit. You're on the West Coast, but you're actually originally an East Coast dude, aren't you?
Yeah, I'm originally from Massachusetts. I grew up in Southern Mass.
Oh, very cool. I have family in Brockton. So.
Okay, yeah, that's like it's like 35, 40 minutes north. I actually used to play baseball a lot in Brockton, right down the street from where the house that Rocky Marciano.
Yeah, Rocky Marciano.
Yeah, Rocky Marciano. For some reason, I kept thinking that I said Rocky Marciano, but what I was thinking it was Vinny Pazienza.
Do you find that no matter how far away you get from Massachusetts, if you get around someone that's from there, your accent immediately comes out?
Yeah, it has to. That's how we communicate. We put on the mask when we leave.
Exactly. Exactly.
So how long have you been out in LA? When did you move out there?
Around 2008, January 2nd, 2008.
Oh, okay. So you've been out there for a while. So, Vincent, you're the writer-director of the Friday the 13th fan film, Never Hike Alone. You also played Jason in the movie.
Mm-hmm.
And the film's available online for free now. I watched it on YouTube. Is that the only place you can see it, or are there other places?
We do still have, fans demanded that we release a Blu-ray. So we have a Blu-ray that we have. We're on our third edition of it. We did a first edition that sold around 1,700 copies, a second edition that sold another 1,000, and then we did a third edition that sold another 1,000. But I'm on the last 150 of those Blu-rays. So people every now and then email me and they're like, "Do you still have a copy?" And yeah, people want to email us at wompsnotfilms@gmail.com. We just send a link through PayPal and get it to people that way.
Very cool.
There's also a downloadable version too.
So here's my question with that.
Yeah, go ahead.
It's a fan film. So is there some loopholes or some hoops you have to jump through to sell a Blu-ray copy of a fan film?
Yeah, it took a little bit of research. I didn't think I could do it at first. I was never going to offer it. And then when I started thinking about it, it was like we were allowed to do a fan film based on the fact that a small amount of people or like a specific group of people were going to allow us to take money from them so we could produce something for them. So it was like a direct exchange of service. It wasn't like we were taking it to profit or we were selling it to Amazon or Netflix or something like that. So when it came to the Blu-ray, when I applied that logic to the production of a Blu-ray, it's very much the same thing. There's a cost of production, there's a cost of shipping, there's a cost of all these things. And then if everybody could chip in and pay for that cost, if people wanted a physical copy of it, we could turn that production around and give it back to them. And we've since used that as a tool to raise money for more films and more products and more films, more productions, things like that. So it's a finite way of creating content where it's not, I'm printing 10,000 Blu-rays and I'm sending them out to Amazon, and when they need to restock, I restock them. It is literally you pre-order it and then we sell it to the people who pre-order it. So it's like paying somebody to almost like get your wedding put on a DVD or Blu-ray. You know what I mean?
I get you, yeah.
It's such a direct service that it's not an endless loop of profit. And it just usually pays itself off. And then, of course, we always cap everything off with everything we do with a donation to some worthwhile cause, whether it's Penny Pines Reforestation Program or the J.D. Martz Recovery Fund. We've recently become monthly donators to the Special Olympics. So there's different things that we can do with the money that we raise when we have excess that we can't keep.
Okay. Well, awesome.
Very cool.
So let's talk a little bit about Never Hike Alone. In general, what drew you so much to the Friday the 13th series that you decided to dedicate yourself to making one of the most epic fan films of Jason never made?
It just started as something where I was just a Friday the 13th fan. Obviously, we've gone a long drought without having films. We were having, in the 80s, they made one every year, and then they kind of broke up, and it was the 90s we got one, and then we got Jason X and Freddy vs. Jason and the remake and
the lawsuit hell. I
don't know, I think Friday the 13th fans can join in my misery of just seeing like this steady decline of quality. And it not just like, it's not so much the way the films are made, because the quality and the production value actually goes up throughout the years, but the storytelling went off the cliff. It was like we were kind of trying to get to this point, and I think as a fan, I was like, I want to see the series get to a point where we can come to a conclusion where everyone's happy.
Sure.
Or I don't know if you can make everybody happy, but just some kind of a conclusion to that, like that Paramount era version.
Just something.
just something. Stop going off on these tangents and just give us like a story that like brings us some closure. Like what are these characters looking for? And I don't think any of the filmmakers were ever looking at that, but I did as a fan. As a kid, I made up my own stories about Jason. I had my own visions of what Jason was and all these things. And when I pursued making Never Hike Alone, it was never to be what it became. It was supposed to be a 5-minute short that I wanted to release on a Friday the 13th as like a special, like, ooh, if we can get a couple hundred people to watch this on like Friday the 13th franchise.com, that will be a huge victory for us because no one watches anything we post on YouTube. So it was,
we can feel your pain.
Yeah. So it really started as that. And the more we kind of pushed and pulled and discovered things and tried things, it grew and grew. And eventually it grew into the film it is today. Where
did you shoot? Where's the locations for that?
It's just outside of Big Bear, California, in a town called Angeles Oaks. It's kind of like on the border of Angeles Oaks and Big Bear. And Big Bear is the closest city that's near there. It's on the backside of the mountain. It's an abandoned camp that we discovered while we were making our first trailer. So we were actually filming at another location for trailer number 1, and the people who owned that property tipped us off to an abandoned camp that no one owned. It was just kind of left to the state. It's out there kind of just being an abandoned camp as abandoned camps are. And when we discovered it, we saw it as an opportunity to do something a little bit more than just have a hiker walk into, a set of cabins, look at it for 2 minutes and then get killed, which was the original premise of the short. And so when we discovered the abandoned camp, we had all these buildings that we could mess around with. We had a lot of rooms that we could set decorate and come up with things. And so that really just kind of sat me down, and I had a palette. I had something I could work with. I had, sets that I knew I could write scenes for. So I kind of just wrote it around the camp about like how he would find the red ribbons and, what would it be like if Camp Crystal Lake was never rebuilt or nobody ever went back there, and not trying to explain Camp Forest Green, but just saying that was another camp. They built it close by, but that's not the Camp Crystal Lake. The Camp Crystal Lake has never been touched.
So that's my question then. In your world, then, which movie are you picking up after, or was that even something you considered?
I mean, technically you could play it after 8, and you wouldn't upset anything. Obviously, Jason Goes to Hell brings its own things to it. We're not close to Jason X.
Brings complications. Yeah.
Brings complications. I wanted it to feel like an extension of the Paramount era, and that if you looked back at the Paramount era as like someone in these films, like say you were a character in these films, you wouldn't necessarily know the details of what happened on the Lazarus or what happened to Tina Shepard. Really, the last known documented event of Jason was probably part 6, because we obviously have the Tommy Jarvis character return, so he knows there. But Jason's made a couple of appearances, but after what I call like the Manhattan incident.
The Manhattan Project, yes.
Yeah, so I mean, it's kind of like this thing where like a lot of these stories happened and all these events happened, but if you talk to a character from our films, they weren't there. They just hear hearsay. So I kind of treat the films as almost hearsay, where it's like, I'm going to treat the films as if each one of them is an account of somebody who wasn't really there. So the details don't match up. The logic doesn't match up. The continuity doesn't match up as the films do. But if you took the spirit of what happened in each of those films and just kept that idea and then said like, okay, if you followed one train of logic, if you follow one train of continuity, if you follow one specific path and you actually carved out an actual storyline for the Friday the 13th characters, that this would ultimately birth the Never Hike Alone series, which is based on like if Jason is a revenant, he came back from the dead when his mother died, and he's been haunting the camp ever since. And he's not. And I know we the fans call him Ghost Jason, and we've adopted that moniker. He's not a ghost. He's not an apparition. It's flesh and bone and lots of other things. And
he's more like a ghoul, or like a revenant, is like you said, is a good way to put it.
Yeah. Revenant's a good word for it. I think that's a good adoption for what we do. But he is. Yeah, I mean, he is bound to the camp, and I wanted to play with that. I wanted to play with like what's really scary about Jason. Let's take everything in the Friday the 13th films that's fluff, the over excessive drug use, the over excessive nudity, all the things that get crammed into these films to make them party films. And I wanted to be like, let's make a thriller, let's make a terrifying movie, let's create an experience that Friday the 13th fans like myself have probably always dreamed about. Like, Imagine if you stumbled onto Camp Crystal Lake, what would you do? You'd look around. You'd poke your head in the cabins and see things. And
sure,
and I had an idea earlier on about the red ribbons and debated whether or not, would the red ribbons still be there? Would the crime scenes still be there? And I just took a swing and did it. And I ended up talking to a police officer after somebody who works on TV shows who gives them advice. And I was like, hey, chick, can I talk to you for a second? I have this movie and I did this. Technically, would a crime scene stay around for like 35 years? And he said that, the way that it works is if there's a crime on your property and the police come in, they do their investigation and they leave, it's not up to the police to clean up your mess. You have to hire a cleaning crew to clean up that mess. Mm-hmm. And since Steve Christie's dead and there's no one around to hire a cleaning crew, that mess stayed.
Yeah.
So we were actually able to play off real logic of like what this place would have looked like. And you can imagine that if you're a resident of Crystal Lake, you've never wanted Crystal Lake to be reopened. You don't want to go up there and clean it up. No cleaning crew inside Crystal Lake is going to go up there and clean it up. And no one wants to buy the property because they know it's cursed. They just want to leave it alone. So as it falls back, kind of like the camp that we discovered, falls back into the ownership of the county, they just kind of wipe the slate clean. And they say, it's not even there anymore. Take it off the map. Take the records off. Let's not have any indication that we are the Crystal Lake or the Green Valley or whatever they want to call themselves, or Wessex County. Like, we're just this town. There's 1,000 Crystal Lakes across the world. And we'll just pretend that we're one of those and we're not the one. And so they tried to like rescind back an anonymity and leave that camp off the map. That's why when Kyle finds it in his book that he's like, wait, I found a trail that's not on the map. That's one of the trails they took off of the records. They just didn't clean it. Like, they cleaned up a lot, but they didn't clean up everything. And so eventually this is kind of even though they had a good plan, it's not a perfect plan. And this is the way that their plan falls apart.
Well, Jason's always got his own plan anyway.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think Jason in this he's changed. Jason isn't the same Jason that we saw in 2, 3, 4, or 6, 7, and 8.
I think it was Manhattan. I think Manhattan did it to him.
It is.
New York changes people. The big city, he's a rural guy.
I think that Jason learned a big lesson, is that he wakes up, he's super pissed off, he kills everybody, and then a day later he's back on the ground or back underwater. And so in the Manhattan incident, he's flushed back out the sea, but he's not killed. I mean, I don't believe that Rennie saw an actual little boy, Jason, at the bottom of that sewer. I think she's just hallucinating on that heroin still.
That's actually a great point. I forgot about the heroin. That makes way more sense.
Yeah, because, I mean, they get a lot of things wrong in that movie.
It's the only way it makes sense.
They even get the eye on the wrong side. He looks normal and he gets deformed. I don't get that. Anyway.
Doesn't make any sense.
So Jason gets washed out to sea. He finds his way back to Crystal Lake. And there he is, and it's finally quiet and peaceful, and he discovers where he hid his mother's head, and he reclothes himself, and he finds a new mask, and he finds this hidden kind of oasis that he can just be alone with his mother and stay undisturbed. And at the same time, the town has helped him out because they've taken Crystal Lake off the map, they've taken all the trails off the map, they blocked them off, all roads in and out are cut off, and he's finally able just to be at peace, but he can't die. So he's almost stuck in this curse of loneliness. He'll never get to return to his mother. He'll never get to see his mother again. And anytime anyone does cross into that world, like we did as an example with the Disappear music video that we did, it's his duty to carry out the curse in which he has been, anointed to carry out for as long as he is walking this earth. And so, and that's where the kind of the motivation for Ghost Jason comes from. He's this 12-year-old boy stuck in the body of a monster, carrying out these deeds that aren't necessarily a part of his true human nature. I mean, when he was a boy, he wasn't an evil boy. He didn't go off and hurt people. He didn't, he was just trying to fit in. And he was outcast and he was treated poorly. And the rage that he's carrying on is his mother's. And so it's kind of a burden to him. And when he wakes up, he has that rage. It's fresh in him. But when he's been defeated and he hasn't been put to rest, he has some time to reflect. And that's the Jason that's there. So in Never Hike Alone, I wanted to play this Jason that through the first half of the movie is very inquisitive. He's a 12-year-old boy. He's looking in. Mm-hmm. He's also sending warnings to Drew, who is getting closer and closer, and he's trying to scare him away. He's like, don't make me kill you, dude. Like, I will have to, but you can get in and get out of here if you haven't smoked weed, you haven't had sex, you haven't done anything that's really going to piss off mom.
Yeah.
Just come in and leave. You're fine.
I love the idea of Jason, who's just sort of wants to live this quiet life alone with his mother's severed head. He's like, I'm out of the game, but these damn teenagers keep bringing me back into it.
Yeah, he's basically Clint Eastwood from Gran Torino.
I was going to say he's basically Pacino from Godfather 3. Like he wants out.
Yeah. He's like, they pulled me back in.
Exactly. They pulled him back, yeah.
Well, I can tell you just from listening this far, so much more thought went into this than part 8. like an enormous amount of thought.
Well, let me give Rob Heaton an out, is the fact that he had other ideas and he was constantly cut back from what his original ideas were. And so that was a big problem for Friday the 13th, was that ever since after part 6, all they wanted to do was Freddy versus Jason, and curveballs kept getting thrown into the mix. So they would come out with Jason versus Carrie, or let's send Jason to New York. The entire film takes place in New York. Well, guess what? You only get 10 minutes.
Right.
Now tell your story. And so I'm sure he didn't want to miss out on the payday and didn't want to miss out on a job, and he wanted to finish it. So he did what he could on the fly, but he wasn't given, as a filmmaker, when you're not given a palette to work with that you really want to be there, it's tough to get that. It's really hard to get that motivation to write something that's like really there.
Sure. Well, and did that sort of factor into why you wanted to make the fan film in the first place? Because you kind of had not carte blanche necessarily, but a lot more latitude to do what you wanted with it.
I mean, to a point, we were obviously hindered by the fact that we were low budget indie.
Sure.
We had to work with inside certain parameters. So if you had asked me before I made Never Hike Alone, what type of Friday the 13th film I would have wanted to make, it wouldn't have been Never Hike Alone. I wouldn't have wanted to do a story about one character and found footage. I mean, those are all words that would have made me vomit listening to that. If I heard Paramount saying, we're doing a story about one guy and he's just going to film himself the whole time. And I've been like, no, that's not the movie we want.
Not my Friday the 13th.
Yeah. So, but at the same time, when it's as a short, it was kind of a thing where they brought up the idea of doing found footage. And it was funny to hear David Bruckner talk about it on a recent podcast of the best movies never made. He talks about the films that he was supposed to make, one of them being the found footage and the other being the 3D version. And in my head, I was like, you really can't do a found footage, because what are they going to do? Toss the camera to each other every time they get killed? It doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, right.
Who's going to run around with a camera all night?
Right.
But it makes sense in this realm. If somebody has a cell phone camera, if somebody has a GoPro, they're a singular person, and you see what happens to them, that's a cool story. And it probably only works for about 5 minutes. And so we came up with that 5-minute pitch. And then my Friday the 13th fan in the back of my head, as we kept expanding it, kept saying, you got to make this interesting. What do you want to see as a Friday the 13th fan that you could only do this way? And so because I had that naysayer in the back of my head, I was constantly working against my instincts on what makes a good Friday the 13th film, but then turning it into a place where if I can't do 12 kills, I can do 12 stunts. Mm-hmm. I can take a character that when you're tossed off the second story of a 2-story house, you're not going to die.
Right.
You might break a leg, you might break your arm, some ribs, but you're not going to die. I mean, a lot of these things that happen to the characters in the films, I mean, you'd survive most of them. When you get stabbed, You don't die instantly. You bleed out and you have a long suffering death. So I wanted to create something that was a little bit more realistic in that sense. A character that didn't just sit there and stare at a blade for 5 seconds as it's coming down on his head. Then instead he goes, I'm going to move,
Right.
None of the characters in the first 12 films ever figured out. So I wanted to create a character that fought back like a final girl from the very beginning. And create that sense of isolation and do things that I thought that actually would be interesting with found footage. So when, the first time Kyle walks through the camp, it's a tour of the camp. It's an introduction to the camp. It's the awe and the scope and the spectacle of what is left behind. That's done in third-person camera, traditional narrative camera work. When we go into Kyle's second trip through the camp, when he's going a little bit further in, that's when we use really what people wanted out of a GoPro experience or found footage experience of a Friday the 13th, is actually passing through room to room, wondering at what point Jason is going to show up. And what's nice about what I discovered about found footage that was really cool was it's a tool where at a certain moment in the film, when you feel like it, you can put the audience in front of the character as they're the shield.
Sure.
So usually as a viewer, we're behind the character. they're in front of us. So if anything happens, it's going to happen to them, not us. But when you put a first-person POV traveling through a door, the audience is going to be the first one hit by any impact or scare. So I thought that was a cool use of camera language.
Yeah.
Coming up with interesting ideas to use the GoPro, like when we throw them out the window and it goes rolling and stops and you get a cool angle and things like that, or just the tracking of the battery and things. It was just all trying to come up with things that like made it feel like when people make found footage films, it's because they don't have enough money and they don't have a lot of stuff going for them. But I wanted to show that you could, even with a found footage film, be a little bit more thoughtful in the way that you tell story. Like there's story to be told with it, and you know, successful ways to do it and successful ways not to do it.
Sure. And I feel like your film, I didn't really think of it as found footage because you successfully blend cinematic shots with found footage. So it doesn't stay in the found footage genre the whole time. It just uses those as tools, you know, for filmmaking and telling a story. And really, I did find it fascinating in this movie that we finally have a self-reliant character who's actually facing off against Jason instead of all the characters being fodder for Jason. And I think that's really why Jason has stopped being scary in some of those later films, is because we know him much more intimately than we do any of these other characters, and we like him more, honestly, than half the characters we meet.
Yeah.
If anything, as the movies go on, you actually start to sympathize more with Jason than you do with the idiot, horny teenagers.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like at some point, somewhere around like part 7, you're just like, why do you guys keep going out to the woods to get high? Just kill him, Jason.
I think it's also the character work as well. I mean, these characters were made to be unlikable, and thus you wanted to see them die. And I think that appeals to some of the fans, you know, the fans who are just there for the body count, who are just there for the debauchery. That's very much the 80s crowd.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, Jason Goes to Hell pokes fun of it in that scene. He's like, what are you guys going to go out in the woods and do? Smoke a little pot and have some premarital sex, like poking fun at it. And and in a sense, Friday the 13th became a joke. It was its own inside joke that just kept getting repeated over and over again. And even though we love these films, eventually the joke gets stale.
Yeah.
And that's where I kind of came in and I was like, I want to see something different. Or if we're going to do a set of characters, let's give them something to actually do. Like they actually are doing something. Like that's why part 1 and part 2 were so successful, is because the characters have something to do other than get killed.
Sure.
They're reopening a camp. They're training to become counselors. There's something there. And then, you know, even part 4, they don't have much to do, but they're trying to get laid. And it's funny watching Teddy and I can't remember the other character's name right now.
Crispin Glover's character?
Yeah, Teddy and what's Crispin Glover's character's name? I don't know. Dead fuck.
Yeah, exactly.
Teddy and the dead fuck.
His character is kind of tragic in that movie. Like Crispin Glover's arc is actually satisfying.
It is. There's an arc. Imagine that.
Yeah, weird, right?
Yeah, and same thing with Tommy's character. I mean, that's why I think also Tommy's journey, 4, 5, and 6. You can shit on 5 all you want, but there's an arc there. There's an arc through 3 films. And so I think ultimately, as a fan, if I could write down my wants and needs for a Friday the 13th film as it would come out, is like, can you give me a first film that sets up more films, and then all those films connect, and Jason doesn't change, and the setting doesn't change, and the costume doesn't change, and nothing changes, but there's an arc. And then at the end of that arc is a true conclusion to what is Friday the 13th, what is the curse on Camp Crystal Lake, who is Jason Voorhees, why is he doing this, and how do you put him to rest? And Never Hike Alone started out as just this experiment, but it birthed this bigger story in terms of the Never Hike Alone franchise that we're trying to build, of like, this is a continuation of the story, but here's the ending, and here is the kind of landing zone that we've sort of been waiting for a long time. And I know as a fan, that's what I wanted. I don't know if that's what every fan wants, but for me, that's where it went. And I think that spirit and that kind of drive resonates with fans when they watch it, because I don't necessarily say that out loud. I don't say any of it out loud at any time, but I think that because I had that outlook, it comes across in the way that it's delivered, because it's taken seriously. It's not a joke anymore. It's not a punchline of a film. It's actually a film that tells a story.
And one thing I love about Never Hike Alone too is something you brought up a little bit ago, which is Tommy Jarvis. So you have, and one thing as a fan film you can boast, you have Tom Matthews. You know, even though there's 3 Tommy Jarvises in the film, a lot of people really identify with Tom Matthews, I think.
Yeah, because he's the adult. I mean, obviously everybody It depends on where you are. I mean, a lot of people don't like 5.
Right.
But John Shepard did a really great job as the teen angst Tommy trying to get over his...
Some of the best shirtless, sweaty acting I've seen in a movie.
Exactly.
Obviously, Corey Feldman's a big hit because he's just a mega star. And then Tom Matthews comes in and he's just this 80s horror darling. And, you know, Return of the Living Dead and all the work that he's done since, it was, you know, he just kind of captured this like spirit of like what Tommy became as an adult. And I think that everybody, you know, here he is, he's a character who's ready to run into the ring and fight Jason anytime he can, which is very, like the last guy who was like that was Rob Deere, and he went down so fast it wasn't even funny. So you have a character that's willing to fight back. Same thing with like a Ginny, who I think is a great character, a great archetype in the series for if they want to do future final girls. Someone who is smart, collected, and in the heat of the moment uses her brains to outthink a character that she is smarter than, and understand that she uses her skill to outsmart Jason, outthink his childlike nature. And that's the thing about Friday the 13th, is that as stupid as most of the films are, if you look at each film, there is something to be taken from each of those films that actually there's a good story there. It just other things get in the way of it, because it's like somebody smart is trying to speak up in the class, and then somebody like raises their hand and farts, and everyone starts laughing and totally ruins what the smart person is saying. So it was, and trust me, I was the guy who farted all the time in class. So I totally get it. But at the same time, it was time for Friday the 13th to change. It was time for Friday the 13th to find a new identity, because it's obviously, you know, wasn't as successful as it was when they tried to bring him back. 2009, although it did okay in the box office, didn't do what Paramount wanted, and thus we never got a sequel. Also, if you look at the foundation of what 2009 was trying to do, there is no foundation for a sequel. How do you get out of that? Like, you're saying Jason's human, but then you do things that make him inhuman, and you're just falling back into the same mistakes. So you open yourself up to the same criticism, and you can say, oh, it's just a Friday the 13th, have fun. I had fun in the 80s. It's 2009.
We had 10 movies of fun.
Yeah. Can we do something that, like, you know, when I have an argument with a Halloween fan about which movies are better, you give me some ammo to say, well, look, we fixed it. You know, like Rob Zombie ruined yours, but hey, we got a remake that actually made Friday the 13th better. And so I think that's one of the crowning achievements for me with Never Hike Alone, was creating something that wasn't just a stupid Friday the 13th film, that actually took it to another level and didn't lose anything. You know, it's like we still get an awesome Jason. We still get cool effects. And if we had more people in that one, we would have done more cool effects. And if I had more time, we would have saw those ambulance drivers got killed. But we had 2 nights to film that scene. So like there were, by being constrained, it made us creative. And that creativity birthed something new. And I think that that's what people really responded to. It was fresh. It didn't feel like the same old thing. But the spirit of what made those films there, and it's the story spirit which was there, that was like paid attention to and respected. And so by that, fans felt respected. They felt respected for having care for these characters, having care for Jason, having care for the camp, really giving a shit. And so because we did that, I think that that's why we got rewarded.
What are the pressures in making something inside a franchise that's so universally loved by horror fans? Like, I think about doing that and I start to poop a little. So I can't even imagine like what the pressures are like making a fan film, and how what did you feel regarding, like, what do you owe the fans?
I mean, I owed it to myself a lot, because I'm a big fan. You know, however critical other people are, I'm 10 times more critical of everything I do on my own anyway. So then throw all my love of Friday the 13th on top of that, taking on an entire production to do all these different things, acting in it, directing it, writing it, but, you know, co-writing, co-acting as Jason. I did share both those roles, but it was a lot of pressure, because that year the added pressure was there was supposed to be a movie, and it got canceled. And we were the only show in town. You know, that was the same year they canceled the Breck Eisner version, which I'm glad they did.
Oh, wow. I didn't realize that.
So we were all of a sudden this kind of, you just saw like the ball on the ground, like make a sports analogy. The football was on the ground. There was a fumble. They dropped the ball. There it is. And there's the goal line, October 13th, 2017. And I had just signed Tom Matthews in secret. And I'm sitting there going, you know, we have something here. There's something real special. And we filmed all fall. We were in kind of a crossroads of all these different things. I was working a full-time job. And that December, I was offered a position to go to China for like 6 months to go finish a movie. And it was literally down to, I have half a film done. I have the opportunity to work with Tom Matthews. I can either go to China, put this film off and maybe never make it, never finish it, or I can quit my job and I can work on a fan film that I can't get paid for, spend all my life savings just to get through this experience and then not know what's going to come out on the other side. So for me, there were a lot of risks involved, not just beyond, imagine that, like you do all that and then all of a sudden Friday the 13th fans are pissed off around the world. It would have been like a failure of a movie, failure to the franchise, a failure of a personal goal, and I'd be super poor after it. So all those things happened, except that people really liked it. So being poor and all those other things kind of were like, well, you know what? It was a risk that paid off.
Yeah. I wanted to address something you said at the beginning of that about you being a fan and you had a personal stake in it that I can't let myself down. I think at the end of the day, I think that's what makes a really good artist. I think that's what makes a really good writer, a really good director is being that sort of critical because you grew up with the material, because you were like, fuck, I can't fuck this up. Like, I have to do this right.
I've also been talking so much shit on Years and Friday the 13th forums about how good Friday the 13th films could be if they just fucking tried. And here I was now trying to back up my words and saying, this could be good. This could be if they just made them this way. And I know 1,000 people say that about 1,000 different franchises and movies and things like that. So it was obviously a big task. And I didn't want to let people down, but I also didn't want to make an ass of myself and deliver and not deliver something that I said I would. Don't get me wrong. There's a lot of things in the film that I wish I could change, that I wish I could go back and do again. Experiences that led to failure, that ultimately led to learning, that led to doing it better as we kept going on. It was a long, steep process of that, but it was one that, we just chipped away every weekend, or when we had the opportunities to go out for the bigger weekends, it was always a learning experience. But as we went on, we got better at it and our crew got closer and we understood each other more. And by the end, we were just like, we had a weekend planned. We would go up, we'd execute our scenes, we'd come home, and it was just like gangbusters. It's not how it started. But by the end, we were in such a groove and everybody believed in it so much that they were willing to go through hell to make it happen.
That's amazing. I want to talk a little bit about your Jason, especially because you are directing and playing Jason. How does that work, directing actors and camera when you're in complete Jason makeup and a mask and holding a machete?
Well, it's a lot easier when you're only got another guy on camera. It's just the two of us. So a lot of it is just me and the cameraman going, okay, film me walking creepily through the forest.
Plus, I guess no one's going to tell the director no when he's like wielding a machete and
yelling at people through the mask and stuff like that. Yeah, definitely. So a big part of it was I actually did have a lot of help. I had a stunt actor by the name of Brian Forrest, who was my stunt double for the film and did a lot of the fight sequences, did a lot of the big moves, the big camera moves, the big fight sequences, all that stuff. Most of it was Brian because I had to be behind camera. There was no way for me to do a 2-minute take and then stop everybody, watch a 2-minute take, and then go, oh, you got to be here. A lot of the time I have the camera guy by his hips and I'm moving him around, or I'm tilting the camera down, or I'm right there, just say, just a little bit to the right, or pan a little bit to the left, right, follow. And I'm whispering in the cameraman's ear the entire time. Without that, we would have never finished the film. But when I could isolate things, when we could be an isolated crew of about 5 people. So when there were 20 people on set and we couldn't waste anyone's time because we were paying people at that point to be there because we were hiring private contractors to come in and do things privately, I didn't want to waste people's time by being in costume. I did get in costume for some of those scenes. Like that's me under the mask when we pull the mask off with the face reveal. Some of the little acting things where I put the mask back on because literally I was the only person who, without being able to see anything, could lift the mask on and put it on perfectly just by feel. Right. A lot of the things that in what's nice is it's kind of like what they do in The Mandalorian. It's like, I think the guy who plays the Mandalorian legitimately didn't play the Mandalorian in like 2 episodes. But when you come up with a character like we did, and I talked to Brian about it, a lot of that is based on the study of how I move. So Brian isn't stepping into the role and playing it how he would play it. He's playing it how I would play it. So that's kind of like the difference between when people ask like, oh, well, if the double and all this stuff, it's like, I know, but it's based on movements that how I act them out. And a lot of that is me walking through a scene in civilian clothes, showing Brian how I would move, the choices that I would make, watching him doing it, and then adjusting those things. He's obviously performing it, but that's the job and the responsibility of a double. So that was super helpful. Same thing for Never Hike in the Snow. So Brian, we were supposed to get Douglas Tate, but Douglas Tate wasn't available for scheduling purposes. So Brian and I stepped back into the role. And again, Brian steps in, does a lot of the work. I come in and I do some of the work.
So do you base your Jason performances on anything from any particular movies? Like, do you take influence from like how Kane Hodder played Jason, or are you bringing your own performance ideas to the table?
No, I mean, I didn't want to try and copy anybody. I think what I did was I looked at the way he was performed and picked out the things that looked good and what didn't look good. Instincts that were made, I've had a chance to talk to Kane quite a few times and talk to him about his thing and just some mental things. So preparation wise, it was nice to talk to some other Jasons and get some inspiration, but ultimately I had to figure out what worked for me. I had to act how my body moves. I had to figure out how to make myself look intimidating, because I'm not 260 pounds like CJ Graham is. I'm 220 pounds, still pretty big, but there's different things you got to do to make yourself look good. So there was a lot of that. I have like a natural limp that I walk with from all the years of getting banged up in sports. And so there was just kind of like this thing that felt right when I moved as Jason. And there were certain things that I discovered by camera testing and, walking tests, I worked in animation for a long time. So when you're doing animation, you have CG generated characters that you have to do walk cycles for and be like, is this how the character is going to move? How does the weight carry within their body? So I took that thinking and was like, we should do that for me. Like, let's just do a live action version of that. So we did walk cycles where I would go up with my team. They would just film me walking around. I'd have half the costume on or an earlier version of it. I think some of it's in the behind the scenes. I have like a part 3 mask on, and my movements aren't great, but they allowed me to see what I was doing. So when I was moving too fast, or if I wasn't putting enough weight into a step, or if I was just too even or too upright or whatever it was things that I could tell and then practice, hone it in, and then go forward from there.
Let's talk a little bit about the mask. You brought it up, because your mask has a little bit of its own design to it that we haven't seen in some of the other movies. Can you talk a little bit about what went into the design of the mask?
Yeah, it was really because I was unhappy with a lot of the masks that came back. I bought a lot of reproduction masks, and they were thin, flimsy. They didn't look intimidating. It was as soon as you turned the head, you saw how thin it was, and it didn't feel like it was an actual film prop. And then also think about logically. It's like the Shelley mask either was taken away in part 4, or if Tommy somehow hung on to it, was destroyed in part 7. And so that one's gone. And so then he gets the mask from part 8, and that one's melted and left at the bottom of the sewer. So that one's gone. So when Jason came back, he had to get a new mask. So I had to figure out where he would get it from. I came up with a backstory that in the 1960s, the Camp Crystal Lake was almost reopened twice. So you can imagine that it wasn't like they tried to open it one day and the next it was closed, but there were probably months of preparation, sort of what Steve Christie did. So that meant that they were buying equipment, they were putting things away, they were storing stuff away. And at one point they probably were thinking about doing a winter camp and had a bunch of hockey masks. So when Jason came back, he would take one of those masks. So when I went back and I looked at the masks from the 60s, I think it's the Jacques Plant masks from that were kind of inspired it, the Detroit Red Wings mask. I looked at those stylings. I looked at all the masks from the 60s and the way that they were constructed and built, and contacted a bunch of effects makers. Nobody wanted to make this mask until CFX came along, and an artist by the name of Brett Morris, who was like, I'll totally take on this challenge.
Awesome. I
sent him a Photoshop version of the mask that I wanted to put together. And it was kind of if we go this far, this is going to cost you $3,000-$4,000 to build this thing from scratch. So I was like, I don't have that much. So we kind of came up with a version that was in between. It was some of the old mask, a lot of the new mask, and then taking that kind of spirit of it and then put it in. So it's a resin mask. It's very thick. It's a good thickness to it. It has weight to it. It looks real. Adjusted the whole pattern so it was a little bit more streamlined and even and things like that. And then We actually had a different eye shape for a while, but it wasn't really working. And so we went back to more of a classic eye shape. I actually traced the eyes from part 3, put them in there, and then adjusted them a little bit. And then it came down to the paint. I wanted something that felt like it was old, like it had been weathered and withered.
Yeah,
and
it looks very aged.
Very aged. And I wanted it to represent both the camp and Jason. That even if it was Jason's original masks, the chevrons washed off a long time ago. They got scratched off a long time ago. I mean, they were barely there in part 4. So how do they hang on after another 30 years when it's just literally 3 days? It goes from a fresh white mask to what it is in part 4. So that was kind of part of it. And what really kind of drove that home was I was going for chevrons at first, and then they did the first pass on it. And in the reference that I gave them, there was a little like F mark on the cheek that they scratched in, because in the original version it was like leftover paint or something in the stuff that I sent them, and they had scratched that in, and I was like, oh, that's really cool. And they showed me the way they did it, and it was a little bit lighter. And I said, you know what? I don't think that this needs a chevron. I think that this is our look. And I started jokingly thinking about it like, okay, Jason has red chevrons. Roy has blue chevrons.
Right.
We're a fan film. We're not official. This is our signature. We don't have any chevrons.
Ah, okay. I like it.
We're the unofficial version of Jason. So it was kind of a cool metaphorical way of doing it.
I like it.
And our chevron is that little F on the cheek. That's what everybody recognizes. That like specific damage is the one that kind of really stands out on the mask. But then it was that ghostly quality to it. There's a blank face. It had a little bit more of that Myers feel to it. And originally I was going to call it the Bone Hawk because I felt like it looked like bone, looked like aged bone. But some fans came in, our sculptor who came in to do the second round of masks, Brandon Scott Murphy, who does Sculpt or Die. We were trying to come up with a catchy name for it for one of the Indiegogos. And he was like, no, I think it's more ghostly. We should call it the Ghost Hawk. And I was like, that's great. And that's where Ghost Jason was born from.
Hell yeah. Hell yeah.
So you brought up Never Hike in the Snow. We talked a lot about Never Hike Alone, but you've got a sequel to this coming out, and what you guys have finished principal photography, am I right?
That's correct. And actually, it's a prequel.
It's a prequel.
Yeah, it takes place the winter before Never Hike Alone. So we want to do something called the Never Hike Alone Saga, which is a continuation of the story of Never Hike Alone, but all from Tommy's perspective. And there's a lot of things that need to happen for that to go forward.
Sure.
Unfortunately, we don't have the money for it. We didn't have the resources for it. There were a lot of things we needed to figure out. We needed something else to work on to test all of our, okay, if we're going to do this again, we can't make it like last time. We have to do it straight away. We can't do a year and a half worth of filming. None of us will survive. We need to bury down and actually make this an actual production that makes sense, like the ones that we work on all the time.
Right.
So I came up with the idea for the Never Hike in the Snow premise, which once again started out as a 5-minute short. It was just going to be a guy getting brutally murdered in the snow.
Which is a great environment we haven't seen Jason in yet.
Yeah, and it was one of those things where I had been pitching, like, because I got a lot of emails after Never Hike Alone. Oh, I want to do a Friday the 13th fan film. What should I do? What should I do? And I kept telling people, I'm like, go make a winter short. It's a home run.
Yeah.
Nobody's done it. All you had to do is kill one person, spread a bunch of blood around the snow, and people are going to be happy. And nobody wanted to do it. I mean, some bigger films, some of the films that I've already released, I pitched to them. I said, you should do a winter short. You should do a winter short. And they were like, no, we don't want to shoot in the snow ever again. And I understand why now. And I have shot in the snow before, but I guess it was such a distant memory. I forgot how crappy it is.
Oh, it sucks. I did one film entirely in the snow, and I totally understand why you wouldn't want to go back. But at the same time, it's so beautiful and it just comes out looking so great.
It's totally
worth it. As time passes, you forget and you're like, it wasn't so bad. I'll go back out in the snow.
And it's what fans are looking for. So it's funny, I want to say the winter of 2018 to 2019, I had the idea and I had almost everything ready to go. I just needed some funding. And instead of going to crowdfunding, I had a few private backers lined up where if I could raise like 10, 15 grand, I could do this scene and people would share. It'd be a nice little short and that could lead us into the Never Hike Alone saga. But that didn't happen. All the money fell through, the opportunities fell through, and I sat on it. I went and did a round of photography, which is like the photos that kind of came out when we announced it and stuff like that. And then that fall decided, and as I sat over the winter or over the summer with it, I read it and I go, one thing that's never been really pursued is what happens after Jason kills somebody? What happens after somebody disappears? That led to us making the Disappear music video, which is also a prequel, which takes place around in like the 1990s, about what happens to these people when they go into Camp Crystal Lake. And then that's where Never Hike Alone started. It was supposed to be stories about the people who wandered into Camp Crystal Lake, found it by accident, and never came back. What happened to those people? Who are those? What are those stories? Unfortunately for me, in that premise, everybody loved Kyle so much on my production team and my producers that we made him survive, because originally he was supposed to die. But ultimately birthed the opportunity to do all these other stories. So I went back and I made the Disappear music video as a pitch video to help get Never Hike in the Snow done. And while I was doing that, I was examining the fallout of, okay, here's what happens when somebody goes missing in Crystal Lake. And this is why Jason remains hidden, is because of all these factors. We were lucky enough to sign Vinny Guastafaro to come back on as Rick Colon and play the sheriff, taking over the mantle of his fallen friend and over his fallen partner. And now in charge of protecting the town, and he does it in a very specific way. A lot of the rules that I told you guys about before were his ideas about we need to stop drawing attention to ourselves and calling people out here to call him back. We need to shoo people away and pretend it's not here and all that stuff, and ultimately come up with a different outlook on this situation than his nemesis, Tommy Jarvis. Tommy Jarvis wants to storm the castle and find the monster and find the dragon buried underneath the castle with all the gold and kill it.
Well, he has some serious psychological issues that need to be put to bed. So I understand that.
Yeah, and we're going to explore that as we go on. We don't necessarily go too far into Tommy's psyche for this one, but we see how he feels about the situation. We see that he wants to confront it head on. And Vinny just sees that, or Rick just sees that as a disaster. That, first of all, he doesn't even really know if Jason exists, because he still has suspicions that Tommy is the mastermind behind this whole thing. Second of all, it's like, what are you going to do with an undead being once you find it? You know, how about we leave that bear and it's sleeping in its cave and we never touch it again? Because as long as nobody's going up there, nobody's going to get killed. And if you do happen to wander into that cave, well, that's on you. So it's these two thoughts of there where Tommy's like, yeah, maybe nobody wanders in, but guess what? That's not how humans work, and that's not how chance and things work. So eventually somebody's going to wander up there, and eventually the bear is going to be unleashed, and we can either tackle that now or we can wait till it attacks us and be on our heels. And so that's the two lines of thought. And I think that, like, as fans, we probably have that same thing. It's like, why don't they just attack Jason? Or like, why would you ever try to attack Jason? Yeah. And so you present these different theories about what makes Friday the 13th from all these perspectives and make them battle each other in the films. And so in Never Hike in the Snow, we wanted to set that up. And we wanted to set up this world, and we wanted to set up a series of characters where you have this character that goes missing and all the people that it affects, the police department, Tommy Jarvis, and the people who were close to that person. And, as it evolved, it became this actually really emotional film about loss and losing people and the way that we react to it and morality and things like that. You see characters making decisions in these films that you don't usually see in Friday the 13th films, but then also saying, hey, we got a lot more money this time. We can do some really cool stuff. So we explored that too. We explore some stuff about Jason in this one that I think are going to blow people's minds. We have some scenes with Jason that it's like, you see him in his environment. You see how he exists even as an undead revenant. And it brings you into his world a little bit. It brings you into his line of thinking. There are things that, like, I don't know. I think the ride of emotions for this film is going to be something that even for Never Hike Alone, we're going to kind of leave in the dust, because this is probably the most sophisticated Friday the 13th that's ever been made.
Yeah, it is really exciting.
Are 3 and 4 also, are there plans for those? Or?
Yeah. So the way it's supposed to go, if you trace it back and we start from the beginning, the first episode would technically be Disappear, which is on our YouTube channel right now. And then it would be Never Hike in the Snow. And then it would be Never Hike Alone. And then from there, we have 3 more films that we wanted to do, which is actually a feature film cut into 3 pieces, a first act, a second act, and a third act. Okay. And so it goes Never Hike Again, Jason Takes Crystal Lake, and The Final Hike.
And then Please Stop Hiking.
Yeah, Please Stop Hiking. It's kind of like 2, 3, and 4, where it's a continuation of one event. And so if you think about Never Hike Alone, that's our Star Wars. That's that's Luke Skywalker stumbling onto the battle between the rebels and the Empire. And the fact that here's this idiot who kind of knows about it, but doesn't know a lot about it, but needs another character to fill in the information of what he's missing, about his past, about what he's getting caught up in, and about his place in it. And Kyle is very much our Luke Skywalker, and Tommy Jarvis is very much our Obi-Wan Kenobi. And before anyone reads too far into that, no, Tommy does not die right away and leave Andrew to do everything else. They very much work together.
And he doesn't remain as a ghost for the rest of the movies?
No, it's very much a buddy story. So those things that I was talking about in the way that like eventually somebody's going to come along and screw up Rick's plan. Well, that's Kyle MacLeod. Kyle MacLeod is the idiot who stumbles into Camp Crystal Lake and unleashes the bear, and discovers some secrets that Jason doesn't want anybody to discover. And now that Kyle has survived and is on his way to town, Jason knows that his cover is blown and there's no way to hide anymore, that eventually they're going to snuff him out. He's been backed into a corner. And so instead of him waiting for people to come to them, he's going to take the fight to them. So Never Hike Again is actually, the reason why it's called Never Hike Again is because it's Never Hike Alone again, but from Tommy's perspective. So it's on the day, instead of starting off with Kyle in the woods going on his hike, you start off with Tommy waking up and going to work and seeing the things that he deals with, delving into his mental issues, the things that he still deals with on this day. And I want to play into the part 5 of it all, bringing some of that thinking and logic into the world of Tommy Jarvis as we know him from part 6. So a lot of people, you see the meme like, you can blame every death after part 6 on Tommy Jarvis because he's such an idiot for digging up Jason. Well, why would Tommy want to dig up Jason? I don't think he would have no reason to do it. I think what happened was, my theory is that Tommy continued to see visions of Jason. He defeated Jason in part 6, thought he did it, but the visions didn't stop. And then he hears a story about the Tina Shepard incident, goes to investigate, looks down at the bottom of the lake. Jason's no longer on the chain, but can't find Jason anywhere. And then everybody thinks, well, Jason got defeated. He's gone. Yeah, you guys think that, but I don't. All of a sudden, the Manhattan incident happens. Well, what the hell? I thought he was gone. Now he's gone again. I don't get it. And so Tommy knows that Jason is still out there, not only because his body isn't where he left him, but because every day and every night he dreams and sees Jason in his everyday life and has to deal with that. And he knows that it's constantly calling him back, and that's part of him being cursed. And one of the things we want to explore in in this series is that as even Kyle recovers from his wounds and he's trying to get out of the situation, Tommy kind of quickly reminds him, tells him kind of like Obi-Wan to Luke, is like, there is no escaping this. You are now a part of it. You have come in contact with the curse, and thus you will be cursed for the rest of your life. So the preview to that is the ambulance scene. Kyle waking up, seeing Jason in the back of the ambulance when he's not really there, having visions, getting stabbed, feeling it, and then waking back up and realizing that it was all a dream. And so I think in part 6, that's what Tommy was suffering from. And he thought, if I could just dig up Jason, like, I got to destroy every single piece of him. This is the only way that we can get rid of him. And that was his attempt to get rid of these curses. And ultimately, that was the curse tricking Tommy into coming back and bringing him back. So the curse is tricky, and it plays with the survivors in a way that, you know, Ginny and Chris and Trish and Tina and all these people who have come in contact with the curse, they live with it to this day, but they deal with it different than Tommy does. They have learned to deal with their emotions, live with it, not let it affect them. But Tommy's the only one who's actively trying to destroy it.
And that's something we've seen in some other Friday the 13th films. People come in contact with, I mean, seeing the vision of young Jason pulling her down on the canoe, and then the reverse of that when another character sees the ghoul version of Pamela Voorhees pull her down out of the canoe. Like, these things weren't physically there, but that would make sense if it's the curse, you know, lingers with anybody who comes in contact with it. Yeah,
you see there's a lot of mental issues with like Chris getting pulled away at the end of that film and just laughing like crazy. Ginny at the end of her film being on the stretcher, just like not knowing what's going on. And we never really get to see what happens to the other characters, you know, but there are things that you could explore there. And the connectivity and bringing them into the new light. But, you know, obviously having the opportunity to work with Tom Matthews, grow the Tommy Jarvis story, I think that everyone kind of identifies with him as the character that kind of carries the torch through the films, since he did 3 times, and subsequently Tom was the last one to carry that torch. So to continue it on and see what it's like, you know, I like when, like, some people are like, oh, they're making another Top Gun. It's like, I'd rather them make another Top Gun than remake it. Kind of cool. What is Maverick up to these days? You know, what is Tommy up to these days? And so, you know, so we ultimately came up with that idea that oh, what if Tommy was an EMT? Like, what would Tommy Jarvis do? Well, it's thematically correct.
He wants to help people.
It fits into the theme of Friday the 13th that he would be an EMT. Roy was an EMT. EMTs are a part of every single film. He obviously can't become a cop because Rick's never going to hire him.
That'll never happen.
Fireman, he's not really involved. But EMT...
I don't know why everyone's just like, he's not a fireman type. Yeah. Maybe he is.
Well, I mean, he could be. He probably does volunteer firefighter work. He probably works with different emergency services as a volunteer or works part-time just so he can keep a finger on the pulse. But as part of his trauma, as part of dealing with his trauma, that he found this certain comfort in helping people, that being an EMT and being able to save someone's life, being in a situation where people are dying, bleeding, burning, whatever it is, it doesn't faze him because he's fought Jason one-on-one.
Right.
How scary can anything else be when it's just natural causes? So he's the person you want running into the burning building. He's the person you want pulling up in the ambulance when something's going down because technically, I kind of saw him as this thing where he's got nothing to live for. So if the car's on fire and there's a kid in there and it's about to blow up, he doesn't care. He's going to pull him out.
He wouldn't think twice.
Because if he goes up with a car, he goes up with a car. What do I care? That solves my issues with the thing. He'd never kill himself.
You figure probably the only other career option for him was to become the crazy old man from the original Friday.
Yeah, Crazy Ralph. Just telling people they're doomed.
That's his only other option is that you're all going to die up there.
Doomed.
Yeah, doomed.
Well, I think that this is what keeps him becoming Crazy Ralph, is that he's actively there and doing something about it.
Sure.
But I think in Never Hike in the Snow, you'll see a little bit of that Crazy Ralph come out in him. Which is fun. We have a couple of scenes where you're like, holy shit, Tommy's a little nuts, which is fun. The scenes
He's
between...
been through a lot. I can understand that, One other thing I wanted to ask you about, it's not specifically about these movies, but just with everything that's going on right now with COVID-19, with the quarantine, you're an indie director. I want to know how you think all this stuff is going to affect indie filmmakers. And if you think Hollywood will be more or less affected than people like you and me who are on the indie level making things.
Well, I mean, I work both, so it's going to be trying. I think that what you're going to see is a lot of guerrilla indie films still trying to go out and just get it done, doing their best to social distance, if they wear masks or whatever they do. But you have, characters that are going to kiss on screen, characters that are going to embrace on screen, characters that are going to fight on screen. They're going to spit and cough and breathe all over each other. So you got a lot of things to think about. I mean, insurance, everything. From the Hollywood level, I'm still waiting for a call for when we can go back to work and I can go work a set, but I'm not looking forward to it. I mean, I'm at this point where I left animation because I wanted the on-set experience. And now that I have the on-set experience and it's hard as it is, I can't imagine how hard it's going to be when there are all these new regulations in place.
Sure.
Days are going to be longer. They're going to be harder. They're going to be more miserable. I'm actually probably going to be looking for a job back in an office just to pass time because I don't want to deal with it. We're very fortunate for Never Hike in the Snow to have wrapped the week before everything shut down.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, legitly, we wrapped that Sunday. We drove back to LA on Monday because we were filming in Flagstaff. I got on a plane Thursday to go help the guys out with Jason Rising in Portland. So I was in Portland when all the restrictions came down, crossing my fingers, hoping that they'd let me fly home, or I was going to have to rent a car and drive all the way home. So yeah, I mean, I just feel bad. There's productions that I'm involved with that are waiting to start. Jason Rising is halfway through filming, or more than halfway through filming now. They're probably about 3/4 of the way, but they have to finish their film. And we constantly talk about how they're going to do it. And what they've been doing is sneaking off with a couple people here and there, keeping the numbers down, where it's literally just Carl James and an actress, or Carl's James, Dan, who plays Jason, and then an actress or somebody else who's going to, and they just film a little bit and they keep the production small. And I think that some people are going to have to, cross their fingers and hope that they don't, get everyone on the cast and crew sick. But I think people are going to make their own decisions and they're going to figure out how to do it. I think that if I would just give advice, is just that as people are thinking about doing this, understanding the risks that they're going to do, less thinking about themselves and the people on set, but more about, okay, when I return back home after days of work, who are the people that I could, hurt? and people have to make some hard decisions. They have somebody at home that has chronic lung disease, or is at high risk for contracting the disease and not making it through, like an elderly parent or something like that. That they just go out, do what they have to do, then self quarantine for a couple weeks, make sure that they're not passing it along, and then moving on from there. And I think that one benefit from all of this is that, and I'm stealing this quote from a friend of mine, Brandon Lescure, who's a producer out of Baltimore. He was like, "Don't worry about it. I'm sure that movie that you were supposed to shoot next week could have used a few more weeks of pre-production."
That's a good point.
So I think people should make time. This is the time that you have this project. You can't shoot it yet. Put that time and care into the pre-production of what you're going to do, because the more pre-production you have, the better your film is going to come out.
Do you have a rough time frame when you're trying to put Never Hike in the Snow out?
I used to.
Yeah.
I had a plan in place. I knew exactly what I wanted to do. I knew exactly where I wanted to go, where I wanted to take it, how I wanted to do it. But COVID has left us all holding the buck, going, is that film festival even going to happen? Are film festivals even going to happen? So I've had to take a few steps back and say, I don't know what's going to go on. So we've just kind of focused on, we pick back up editing, I think in 2 weeks is what I was told as an estimate. I need to take it through the post-production, all of the departments, as far as like asking music and visual effects and sound and all that stuff, how long they need, how long we need to finish cutting it. Different things we got to do, titles, things like that. Once I get the bids from everybody on time, then I can, then I know when I'll have a product. Then I can give that over to our Blu-ray makers and stuff like that. They can start building the discs and things like that, because I wanted to, basically the day we launch, I wanted to 2 days before be able to put Blu-rays in the mail and start getting them out to people. That way, everything was kind of landing at the same time. We were still pushing people to watch it online, but at the day after, you're getting your Blu-ray in as well. So we're trying to get all of those ships to line up, and it's going to take all summer. So you're looking at like fall is the earliest, winter is the latest, but it will definitely be. Well, I don't know if I can guarantee anything, but the goal is not to release this in 2021, but to release this in 2020. Find a good place to do it. And then, there's other fan films that are coming out, like Jason Rising's coming out on November 11th. I believe I heard that Fall Like Camp Blood is coming out sometime earlier in the fall, like in the September areas. Obviously, Halloween Kills is coming out September or October 16th. So there are certain dates we need to avoid so we don't run into any interference with people not being able to pay attention to us and not draw attention away from other fan films. So it's just kind of about finding the right place for it. And really what I'm trying to do is find, like we did with Telluride Horror Shows, we had an opening night premiere. We launched the film at the same time. People could watch it in place, and then we could launch it online congruently. And we're trying to do the same thing. We want an event. We want to bring out all of our actors. We want to have a moment where we can all sit down and celebrate our accomplishment and have a real premiere, and then let online do its thing. We're in search for it right now. We have a couple of options, but none of those places can guarantee us that they're going to have an event. So I've also reached out to other people now and said, hey, if we can't go to an event and we can't do an event like that, what other types of events can we host, whether online or going through a drive-in and like renting out a drive-in to do our premiere, which would be pretty cool. We could all do our interviews from inside our cars, stuff like that. So there's things to figure out, but we have all summer to do it. And I'm not really too worried about it. I know fans are going to be there when we're ready to release it, and everyone's anticipating it. So yeah, we're really confident in what we shot. It's a much different film from Never Hike Alone. We did find a way to incorporate found footage into it, but it's not the same way. We shot with better equipment. Evan Butka was the DP on this film. We shot with his Red camera that shoots 8 and 6K. So we shot it with that camera the entire time. Unlike Never Hike Alone, which was shot with like 4 or 5 different cameras, because we just took whatever camera we could get that weekend. Yeah. So now we have like a universally shot film on one device, other than like the GoPro and drone footage that we created. It's our goal was to make this look like it belongs on HBO Max. And in fact, Evan, who works on HBO shows, showed some of the footage to people who were developing sex at HBO, and they were like, "What is that? Like, that looks really good." So
awesome.
we got the approval from some people like really high up for the way that it looks, and we're just really excited. It just feels like, our evolution of the way that we're making films at Womp Stomp Films. Like we had done Pathosis, which was a step up for us. We shot that all with Ben Meredith as our DP and shot that on an Ari. So our technical skills are getting better. Our look is getting better. Our overall production value is getting better. And we want to produce stuff that feels like it belongs on network TV.
That's awesome. Well, we're super excited to see it, man. We can't wait for that to come out.
Me either. Because it means I'm done working.
I know we all used to have plans.
I'll be honest with you. Like, I feel like you still have time to put a subtitle on Never Hike in the Snow, A Voorhees Christmas. Just throwing that out there.
Yeah.
It is a winter horror film. There's no reason not to include.
Yeah, maybe we can superimpose like a little Christmas tree in the corner of his cabin.
There you go. There's some jingle bells in the sound mix, and you're there.
He's putting a present under for his mom.
Yeah, see? It's a family event.
I gotta believe that he's like, what mommy want for Christmas? Mommy want blood.
Well, he does bring her back a present, that's for sure.
Well, Vincent, thank you so much for joining us
and
and talking with us about Never Hike Alone, Never Hike in the Snow, and just Friday the 13th in general. It's been awesome chatting with you.
Yeah, man.
You guys as well. I hope you have a safe and healthy stay-at-home and that we all get through this with our minds intact by the end.
That's the idea.
All right, brother. We will talk to you later.
All right. Thanks again, Vincent.
Thanks for having me on. This is great.